Welcome back to another episode of the show where Mr. and Mrs. Magera go on it and talk about history-related subjects.
So I can learn with you guys, and I can say the things that you're thinking. Unless you guys are just on your phones not paying attention, then...
In which case, get off your phone and pay attention.
Yeah, because you're about to hear some really interesting information about...
the feudalism in Europe.
Okay, can I just be honest? I don't know how excited I am to hear about this.
Well, you should be very excited.
Well, tell me
because
why.
this is about like the time of we have knights and kings and nobles and
that's what feudalism
fighting dragons. Except there were no dragons, so there won't be any dragons.
So this is the time of fairy tales.
Actually, yeah, this is where fairy tales were written and written about this time, but we're not going to run into any fairies. Tinkerbell does not. We'll not be talking about Tinkerbell today.
Okay, here we go.
Right,
I got it on. Let's go.
Going.
Let's teach me some stuff, Mr. Magera.
So we're going to go back to where we kind of left off in our last video. We talked about the decline of a lot of classical empires in class, but in the videos we talked about the fall of Rome. And how the Rome fell. Well, when Rome fell, it actually was divided between a bunch of people. All these kings from different areas.
We're not talking Eastern, Western. We're talking all of it.
No, Western Rome. This is just a Western. Remember, the Eastern Rome survived, so the Eastern half, that's over here, is going to stay together all in one piece. But the Western half, which is this, basically...
It's all cut up.
Yeah, it's like, imagine if you took carrying a mirror and you dropped it and it just shattered all over the place. That's what happens to Western Europe.
Who gets to decide?
Well, it's just that every single person who has power, if you have an army, you try to make a little kingdom for yourself.
So it'd be like if all the 10th graders got together and they were like, this is our hallway. And they didn't let anyone else come in the hallway. That's their spot.
And
but then
yeah, their classes. Yeah,
but then somebody else, 11th grade, goes down to the gym and they say, this is our gym. So their part's bigger, but...
Yeah, so they just kind of all go and they try to take over different spots, basically. This was very violent, and the feudalism ends up becoming this political and economic system which allows kings to have armies and be able to organize themselves so they can protect themselves in this very violent and divided world they find themselves in.
How is this different than what it was?
Well, before it was all one Rome, right? It was all pretty much united.
Now it's more...
Now it's all divided, so there's all these different people all fighting for power, and that's... going to bring us to feudalism. So we're going to describe real quick how feudalism works, okay?
Cool.
So on the top of feudalism, you have the king, okay? The king is the one in charge, right? And the king needs an army because he needs people to fight for him. But how do you get people to agree to fight for you? Well, you have to give them something. And what he has, because he's a king, he has lots of land. Okay. So he goes and he finds these lords and barons, and he says, I'm going to give you a ton of land if you give me... a bunch of knights and military service, and you vow to be on my side, right? You vow to serve me. So these lords, dukes, barons, that we're going to call nobles, agree to fight, team up with them. And they give them their military service, and they give them, money and knights, and he gives them land.
If you're a noble, is it like your kid becomes a noble? Like Downton Abbey?
Yes, it was hereditary, so it's all hereditary. So if you're whatever,
it stayed in the family.
Yeah, whatever level you were born at, you're probably going to stay at that level. You're not going to be able to change.
You can't move up.
Yeah.
Can you marry? Can peasants marry knights?
No.
Oh.
Okay. So then the nobles are like, well, we need people to help fight so we can send to the king. And so they give some of their land away, this fief or more land, to knights. And each knight gets his own little piece of land with his own village in it. And when a knight gets this land, she promises the Lord, I'm going to fight for you. You know, if you want me to fight, I will. So you can see how it's kind of a chain reaction, right? So the noble needs soldiers, goes to the nobles need soldiers, they go to knights. And then the knights basically tell... who's working this land is the peasants or the average person.
I feel like they're getting the raw end of the deal.
They do, and they are actually they don't have the happy thing. So they basically just work for the knights, and they have to give them food and service, and they basically give them a lot of because they don't usually own the land. So
what's the difference between a peasant and a slave?
Not much. The difference being is that a slave was usually property, so they didn't have any rights. Peasants usually had some rights. And they would be able to have a little more freedom, right? You could go to different places.
Where a slave, you'd have to, okay.
But serfs couldn't. Serfs, which is a type of peasant, wasn't allowed to leave the land. They were stuck on it. They were not allowed to.
They were like a slave.
Yeah, they were basically property, right? And these peasants didn't own the land. So they just work it, give part of it to the knights, keep the rest. So they could advance, but yeah. So this is feudalism, this chain where they give these lands away.
Can anyone be a knight?
No, only if you were pretty much born into that.
Wow. So, okay.
Yeah.
Just wondering.
So you can see the different levels of society. So at the top you have the king, the right underneath that's nobles, the knights, and the peasants at the bottom, who are the majority of people. So we're going to be talking now about the impact of feudalism. What was its impact? Why does it matter? A big part of feudalism is that lords and knights had a lot of power.
Okay.
This is because they each had basically their own small armies, as we talked about, because they had to serve the king. So they had a lot of power that they could use. Also, countries weren't very united. So if you were in like France, you weren't exactly, you might be a lord of France, but you might not be completely loyal to your king, right? You have some weight because you have this your own small army that if you don't like what the king's doing, you might go try to be like, hey, let's make this other guy king that's going to actually do what I want him to do. So the
switch families.
Yeah, exactly. So they can switch who they their allegiance lies. They can agree with different things.
So this makes it where the king actually wants to do a good job.
Yes, because
so it keeps them accountable.
Yeah. If the king does bad, these people are going to do it. The worst part about this is that the poor and powerless peasants are kind of at the bottom, and they make the majority of people. So if our class was born into feudal
there's like
Europe,
what, 14 of them?
Yeah, let's say there's 14 people in the class. Maybe 12 of them would be peasants, and the other 2 you might have a knight and 1 noble, and then I get to be king.
That could be like the new. That means I'm queen. That could be like the new, like you peasant.
You
insult.
peasant. You can say that.
Peasant.
You peasant. Yes, you peasant. So the majority of people were going to be peasants and the bottom class. So that brings us.
That would make Benji a prince.
Yeah, that would make Benji a prince. I'm sure he would like that, minus having a bunch of poor peasants at me. But that brings us to our Mrs. Magera's
tea time. Well, actually, in the beginning, I said I didn't know what feudalism was, but then I realized I actually did look up feudalism to find the tea. So I knew that there were castles. So this is where our tea comes from.
Each knight usually owned his own castle, or each lord had their own castle.
Every knight did?
So you'd own a
There's so
castle, and
many
then you own the
castles.
land around it.
Have any of you been to a castle? I'd love to hear if you did. There's no way for them to comment on this, though.
They can. We'll put it on YouTube. So.
Oh!
What do you
let
say?
us know
Let
if
us
you've
know
ever
in the
been
comments.
to a castle. Yes, but we'd love to know in which castle, because we will Google it, and we will, because Mr. Magera loves castles, but we've never been to one.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. My thought process just left. What was I doing?
You're talking about
tea time. But
yes.
this is my tea. This is Ceylon. As you guys can tell, this is the 3rd video of this tea. It's because I make it in a big picture, and it gets me like 5 days.
What's the tea?
Oh, okay. Let me tell you the tea.
out.
Well, it's Ceylon tea. Anyway, so it's about castles.
Okay.
And so in castles they have the things on the side. I don't know what they're called. Like you see like in story times the pointy part. Honestly, the only castle I'm thinking of right now is like Harry Potter's castle, but it has like domes.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Anyway,
Sure.
and in it there's spiral staircases.
The towers, yes.
Yes. Okay. So, do you want to hear why there's spiral staircases? Do you know this why?
No, why?
The reason why, it's not because it's like the most effective way to get to the top. It's because when knights would come and attack the castle, that's where they went, because it would give them, like, it was really hard because the knights had a bunch of armor on, and so they would, they couldn't run up very fast, but like the people could because they weren't wearing armor, so they'd run up really quick, and it would give them a chance to like lock the door or like throw things down, whatever they needed to do. It gave them a chance to do that. But I also thought this was super shady on their part, but like super innovative.
Mm-hmm.
Super innovative. But they would do it clockwise on purpose because the knight, because the knight always had its sword down, and it made it really hard for the right leg to go up, so they would trip. Isn't that kind of funny?
Yeah.
They're like, we're gonna do it this way so you trip, and so they could live. But yeah. Anyway, that's the tea. That's not a very juicy piece of tea, but I thought it was really interesting.
Tea.
Like,
yeah.
I would love a spiral staircase.
Yes. So
Mr. Magera's done with the tea. You see that? He's like, next, let's go
like
on
we
with
spent
our
a lot of
lives.
time on some.
This is like the most interesting part
tea.
of the whole feudalism.
I don't know. That spiral staircase was the best we could come up with. Bye, guys.